We are one of God's people and we don't crawl before anybody. We can't spend the rest of our lives groveling. We did bad things. We are not bad people. We were unwell. We need to go about keeping our side of the street clean, cleaning up the past, etc., all of that kind of stuff, but not allow people to use this to bash us over the head with for the rest of our lives.
I dreamt you were twisting through seven.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I am Veronica, and this is
Chip. I'm learning, slowly learning.
We've done away with last names. We don't feel we need them anymore.
Yeah.
This week is a We Answer Your Questions podcast, and we got quite a good few responses to this one. We won't be able to get through all of them, but we'll do as many as we can. And this is on how to accept your past. And we just sort of picked out a few sort of different questions here, but it was really interesting, kind of the response. And I actually think this is a really big issue, actually, don't you?
So do I. Yeah,
I
think
it's part of the process.
It is part of the process, and I think it's something that a lot of people really, really struggle with. We come into. I would take the view that we come into our drinking careers with a fair degree of shame or difficulty about our past anyway, about the way that our childhoods have been and things like that. But then when we go into years of, decades or a decade or however long it is of heavy drinking, we accumulate, without any doubt at all, a lot of things that we don't like and that we're ashamed of. And often that shame can be the thing that actually motivates us to get well and push us into recovery, because if we didn't feel ashamed of anything, if we didn't feel that we were upsetting people, why would you bother to go and get better? If there weren't any consequences, if there wasn't people's disapproval or people saying, I don't want you in my life any longer, why would you bother to change? Actually, it's a question that often comes up I work with families, and they say, well, he doesn't get any better. He doesn't, he just sits there and he does this, and we bail him out of jail, and we do this and we do that, and we feed him and we do this. And I say, well, where's his motivation to get better? He's not looking at his impact on other people. And then I think, if that is the thing that motivates you into, and it was certainly the thing that motivated me into recovery, is you then, at some point, when you've got over the actual sort of difficulty of getting sober and everything, you then have to start living with and learning how to accept the fact that you haven't been quite such a wonderful person as you thought you were, and that there have been times when your behavior has left you feeling ashamed and uncomfortable. And sometimes people, that's a really big relapse factor. They live so much with that shame, they don't feel they can overcome it, and they return to drinking. And that's I think that's quite a common cycle. So I think this is a really great question, because I think people really do need to try and get a bit of insight into it.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely a pattern that I see a lot, is we just have the crushing shame and guilt about what we've done and how we've behaved, and that just becomes too much. So we drink to take away those feelings, and then we end up doing more things that we're ashamed and embarrassed, and so it goes on. But yeah, so let's start with Michelle's question. I feel as though I let my family down, husband, daughter, son, and son-in-law, due to my drinking. I'm enjoying being part of their lives now. I feel as though they are now getting the best version of me. How do I move on and let go of the guilt?
Well, it's great that she is in that position and wants to address it. I certainly think we're uncomfortable with guilt. We're uncomfortable with being faced by, she's obviously got very close family here who obviously, she looks at and she remembers the things that she's done, and she feels bad about it and she feels guilty about it. And one of the things that drives alcohol drinking or drug use is we want to numb those uncomfortable feelings. So she's having to sit with these uncomfortable feelings, and she wants them to go away quickly. And I think the message I would say is they don't go away quickly. It takes time. It takes time to, first of all, it takes time to kind of for other people to get used to the idea of you being sober. They're having to get, she says now they're getting the best version of me. Unfortunately, families and loved ones take longer to kind of trust that process of change. And it's always a source of great frustration to people when they first get sober. I've been sober for a month now and nobody trusts me. I can't believe it. And yet, obviously, they don't trust you. You probably had a month of sobriety before and it's gone wrong. I think the fact that she acknowledges the guilt, or she acknowledges that there are things that she's done which, as she said, weren't the best version of herself, is the starting point. I think she then has to begin with, I think, carry on behaving in a way that makes sure she doesn't make that situation worse. Because one of the cycles that I am very familiar with is of people making a big noise about getting sober. The husband, daughter, son, and son-in-law, they all get really excited. They all get really pleased. They raise their expectations of hope. And then if somebody relapses again, then that feeling of guilt and the difficulty they have is going to be exacerbated considerably. So I think to start with, just concentrate on staying sober and being the best version of yourself. As for letting go of the guilt, I mean, I have seen people, certainly in some support groups, quite glibly going, oh, well, I've got an illness, I've got a disease, there's nothing I could do about it, so there you go. And kind of been, in a way, quite dismissive of their behavior and saying, well, there was nothing I could do about it. I'm powerless over my disease, I'm powerless over things, so let's move on. And I think that's a mistake. I think I understand the concept behind that, but I think if you're talking about actually you as an individual letting go of the guilt, you have to, first of all, be in a position where people are prepared to help you do that. But I think also yes, of course, you are the victim of a traumatic childhood or a difficult childhood, and that was probably one of the things that fueled your drinking. And I know without any doubt at all, I behaved incredibly badly as a parent with my daughter. And that was actually the thing that motivated me to get that. The guilt about that was the thing that motivated me to get into sobriety. And then once I'd got sort of steady in sobriety, then I had to start looking at all the baggage that I brought into sobriety with me. So the shame, the guilt, I could see that she was affected by my drinking and the things that had happened while that was going on. And I felt really, really bad about it. And I think that went on for I would think that went on for quite a long time. And maybe sometimes I carried it too far and allowed her to get away with things, because I think that's another mistake that people make in this type of situation, is they go so far the other way about, oh yeah, no, I feel so guilty. Do what you like. Do what you like. Yep, no boundaries. We won't have any boundaries because I know we didn't have any boundaries when I was drinking. And now you can do what you like. I'm going to make up. I'm going to be super mum or super dad. So you can do what you like. And I think that often causes problems as well. So there was definitely a part of me at the beginning of my journey that I think didn't put proper boundaries in place, probably was allowing her to get away with things that shouldn't really have done because I felt guilty. And I think it's a long process. I think it takes time. I mean, years really to get to a point
it's not
where
words, is it? Because talk is cheap. It's
words mean nothing.
actions. I mean, we can't
Yeah,
time travel. We can't change the past. And I know this is a really big one, as you've spoken about there, is when you're a parent. Um, I think you have to also accept that everyone else in the family has their own process. So they're in a
yeah,
different place to you. They might, and
yeah,
they have their own process, and that takes time. And you need to give
yeah,
them space to have their process. Um,
yeah.
and it's about making amends, but through our behavior. It's
Yes,
being
exactly.
being fully present, all of that kind of stuff. So
how many times have we seen that impatience, impatient sort of indignation?
Yeah.
I'm really mean it this time. I really am mean
Yeah.
it, and they don't believe me. They
Yeah.
just don't. They still go on about this, and well, yeah, they do. Funnily enough, do I remember people who owe me money from 20 years ago? Yes, I do. And so I think you're right. I mean, we've got to be very careful because words are cheap, and we have often said, "I'm really sorry. It won't happen again." You know, our, we really have lost all our vocabulary has no value at all. Really, it's our actions that will make a difference. And so, I think by behaving better, you get into a position where people are feel more able to kind of listen to you. Maybe they've got their process, as you said, they've got their process. They may be very angry, and very damaged and very hurt by that, and that may linger with them. You've got no control over how long that lingers with them. It may linger with them longer than you want it to, or longer than you think it should do. But that's not for you to decide. But as far as the guilt, I think it probably took me about 10 years probably, and with the help of other people who were saying, okay, Chip, I think it's probably time, you can move on now. You've
Mm,
been
mm.
a good person now, or you've done your best. I think you can move on now a little bit. But it took a much, much longer than I anticipated.
The other thing I'll add to that is, because I've seen this happen, is we absolutely need to clear up our past, and there's lots of ways to do that, and this takes time.
Yep.
However, there
Yep.
does come a point where people close to us will sometimes use our past to manipulate us and punish us. And there's a
Yep.
point where you know what, it's from the big book of AA, and it really this is what I'm trying to say, and I know you can take or leave the word God. We are one of God's people, and we don't crawl before anybody. And it's we can't spend the rest of our lives groveling. We're going to stand, head
Sure.
high, shoulders back. None of
Yep.
us were, we did bad things. We are not bad people. We were unwell.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but I do feel that that's sometimes what happens is that, and that's, that's about, there's a whole bunch of work you can do about that. But we need to go about keeping our side of the street clean, cleaning up the past, etc., all of that kind of stuff. But
Yep.
not allow people to use this to bash us over the head with for the rest of our lives
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. And that can often be a very convenient way for our whoever it is, family members, partners, friends, to not look at their part in the process. I mean, even in a relationship where somebody is drinking too much and behaving very badly, there's probably two sides to that relationship. I mean, I'm not in any way trying to condone bad behavior while you're drinking, but when that person gets sober, maybe the other person just, I mean, that's quite something we come across a lot, where the other person, the partner, also drank, but didn't drink as much as you did. So you actually served a very useful purpose for them, because you allowed them to carry on drinking. But I'm not as bad as Chip was, so that's fine. I can carry on drinking. And then you get sober, and they don't like that, and so they will say, "Well, yeah, it's all very well you talking to me about not drinking, but do you remember when you did this? And do you remember when you did that?" And they can, as you said, use it in an inappropriate way to kind of keep you down. But I mean, you're right. I do think it's terribly important to address where we have made mistakes, bad judgments, bad behavior. I do think it's incredibly important that we address that. I think that's a really
Yeah.
good way of sort of emptying our rucksack of guilt and shame by actually going and addressing it
Yeah.
wherever possible. Sometimes it's not possible to do
Yeah.
it directly, but I think by behaving well, that goes a long way to lessening the guilt, actually, by behaving. I mean, she's doing it. She said, "I'm now being the best version of herself." That is the quickest way she will get to letting go of the guilt. And there comes a point, I think, when you do have a bit of a choice about, okay, have I dealt with this? do I really need to hang on to this as long as I have done? Can I give myself a bit of a break now? I've been a different person for 15 years now. I think I've kind of balanced the book slightly. But uh, maybe you need to ask the question, what's in it for you about living in that guilt?
Yeah.
What's the payoff for you of living in that guilt?
Hmm.
Because it can limit you. Well, I can't do much because I'm such a bad person, and I can't do that because I've always
Mm.
made a mess of it, or I've always done
Mm.
things badly, and that can be quite limiting, and make sure and it means that you don't have to push yourself too hard because
Mm.
you've kind of laid over yourself this blanket of limitation of I'm not very good. And so my answer to that question would be the best version of yourself,
Mm.
and uh, it'll be different times for different things. I mean, there are a few things I did when I was using that I don't think it would be right to ever sort of not feel guilty about.
Mm.
Uh, there are there's a sort of, I know I used this word earlier on in the conversation with you, there's a sort of hierarchy. There
Mm.
are things that I did that I don't think it would be right to ever sort of say, oh no, that I can let go of that. That would be inappropriate. But I think there are a lot of things that over time, you know bit of sobriety, we can start to let go of the guilt of some of these things, because it doesn't
Yeah,
help. It's not a helpful thing for sobriety.
it's not. Okay, so this is a good question from Winifred, and actually Sarah asks something similar as well, but I'll read Winifred's. There are times when a memory surfaces and feeling of shame hits me on a physical level. My face gets hot, my stomach sinks, tears swell behind my eyes. I replay all the greatest hits of my past mistakes. How do I deal with sudden feelings of shame that overtake me from time to time? Actually, Winifred just celebrated a year sober, so I know kind of. Well done,
Okay.
Winnie. I remember that. Oh God, I remember that, just things that stick in your mind. You're going about your day, and then just I don't know, something triggers the memory, and those feelings just flood in, and you just want to like crawl
Hmm.
under a rock because you're
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's one thing. So there was this one thing that I remember that stuck with me for a long time. I was in Key West and I was living in an apartment with my friend, and her parents were visiting from King's Lynn, and they'd never been on an aeroplane before. It was a really big deal that they came. Like it, they sort of had always vacationed in the Lake District, so getting to America was like a very big
Hmm.
thing. And I used to live in King's Lynn, and I was on the phone to like a friend, I think, who was telling me about someone who was bad mouthing me in King's Lynn. Oh, so and so said all these things about you. And I'd had a few drinks before I was on the phone. And I remember just kind of going off on a like, King's Lynn is like, they're those people and people who live there, and they're like going off on a rant. Guess what? Guess who was in the next room? And honestly, I swear, I
Yeah.
feel like I went on for ages, like top of my voice, put the phone down, and then they walked out of the room and looked at me, and I was like, oh. And that memory would come back so often, and those feelings of shame, of just how terribly how I just, ugh. And here's the thing that kills you. It's like, that isn't me. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, but I'm not typically inconsiderate or it's the feeling of like those people now think I'm inconsiderate, rude,
Yep.
biased, ignorant, and I'm none of those things. But from my behavior, I can
Mm.
see how you come to that conclusion. And oh man. So
Yeah.
honestly, the only you must have a few like that where you're just like, oh,
I have a lot like that. I mean, I was a sort of very visual street junkie, and obviously, as you go about the world, anywhere you go, you will see very visual street junkies, and they're kind of a bit of a menace. And when I see people like that, and I can see them, they're like kind of hyenas. I was like one. I was like that. I was always looking for the next bit of prey, and kind of scout it. Oh God, it was, and I can see it. And when I see people do that, I do have that, what she calls, a really physical reaction of, oh my
Mm,
God, I can't believe I was like that. And but at the same time, and she says, I replay the greatest hits of my past mistakes, and there's a sort of, I think there's a validity in that. Yes, you've something's triggered a bad memory, and you've had a bad feeling. I think it's appropriate to have an emotion that is probably a little bit difficult to handle, just as it is appropriate when you have a really good memory and you have a really wonderful ecstatic feeling that comes back to you from years. Our mind brings back good memories as well as bad memories, but I think when we feel ashamed and we see somebody behaving or doing something like we did, it does bring up a reaction. I think it would be, in a way, there's a kind of, I would say to Winifred, that's how we work as humans. We sometimes can put things in a box and put it away in our mental attic, and somebody will suddenly do something that makes that box jump open, and we have all the feelings and emotions, and it is an uncomfortable feeling, but I don't think that's inappropriate. I think if it depends how she deals with it. I mean, if it absolutely kind of ruins 3 weeks of her life, then that's probably an overreaction. If she goes, okay, oh yeah, I used to be like that, and oh, I remember that. Oh, that doesn't feel very nice. That's a bit of an uncomfortable feeling. Uh, I don't think that's any different from having a really lovely memory, and letting that wash over you for a little bit. But um, I think it's a perfectly natural thing that she's doing. I'm not trying to minimise Winifred's feelings, because she obviously has, feels them strongly enough to write about them, and talk about it. And she obviously gets really upset about it. I think that will diminish over time, and I'm not saying that she will, not ever feel bad about it. I just think the reaction, the emotional strength of the reaction, will diminish a little bit over time.
sorry, what I was going to say is I
Go on.
really think this is why the amends is so important, and this is part of the 12
Yeah.
step tradition. So I had another memory that just did me in, and it was when I was cleaning. I used to clean for this very old woman, and I found $2,000 in cash, and I took it, obviously, and
Yeah.
I just felt. I mean, I was mortified at the time that I did it, but I still did it because it was drinking money. And then when I got sober, that just haunted me. And I couldn't. She
Hmm.
died, and I couldn't even remember her last name, so I couldn't even contact the family. So what I did was I set up a monthly payment to a victim of crime. What's it? It's in
Yeah.
the UK. Victim. There's a victim of
Yeah.
crime
Yeah.
charity. And I wasn't
Yeah.
even making much money then. I was working for you. And I I said I think it was maybe £20 a month. And
Yeah.
I just let that run for years. I more
Yeah.
than paid back whatever it was. And that helped massively in,
Yeah.
I can't go back in time. I have no idea of contacting her next of kin. That's impossible. So what can I do? I need to do something. This money wasn't mine. I took it. There's a charity. I'm going to I'm going to pay it off to the charity so that other victims of crime will be benefited. And that
Yeah.
action helped reduce it by probably 90%, and it's gone. So I think, Winifred, what you need to look at, and we can talk about this in one of our sessions, is uh what actions you can take. Like sometimes it's an apology, sometimes it's a conversation, sometimes it's a, you know what, I look back on that time and I just feel like I didn't behave very well. And I'm just, kind of looking at my behavior recently. I just want to apologize if my behavior at that time really impacted you, because I felt,
Yeah.
whatever. Just a simple conversation.
Yeah.
I think the amends process is key. And I just, I don't, you can do it in the 12 steps. I don't think that's, again, it's not that is a tradition that's in all kinds of practices. It's not just the 12 steps, lots of
It is. Yeah.
religions and
It is.
etc.
Yeah.
So I think, like, for me, it's like, do as much as you can to clean up your side of the street. that is the
Absolutely.
way. Time will heal it, but honestly, clean up your side of the street by taking action as much as you can. That is what will help the most.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I did a video with the police that was going to be shown to people with addiction problems, and I thought that was sort of my way of kind of
Yeah.
helping put back a little bit. And I've done things throughout my. However, there is one. My first wife, who I treated very badly. I was very young. I was 21 when I first. The marriage only lasted about 3 months, and I behaved very badly and disappeared. And uh, and and she was somebody I felt that I owed an amends to, and it took me 20 years to find her, if not longer, maybe 25 years to
Wow.
find her. And I got
Wow.
detectives on the case, and I got
Wow.
eventually, when with the introduction of the internet, I was able to kind of do search processes that kind of, and I found a list of people with similar names. I sent out emails to all of them
Wow.
saying, "Are you the person who married me?" And one of them said, "Yes, I am that person." And I thought, "Oh, great! I'm going to be able to go and make amends to her." And we arranged to meet, and she was absolutely furious, still so
Wow.
angry, and she
Wow.
came, and also, to my shame kind of thing, she also then started telling me things that I had completely forgotten. And
Wow.
she went, "And you did that?" And I went, "Oh my God, I did. I've forgotten all about that." But it was, she was, I mean, the thing is, she had never had the opportunity in that 20 years or 25 years to actually address her remarks to me.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
think
And her
she
feelings and
necessarily
experiences are valid.
seethed on it. Yeah, exactly. And I don't think she seethed on it for 25 years. But when she was given the opportunity,
Yeah.
she quite rightly let me have it. And
Yeah.
it was incredibly uncomfortable. But, and I walked away from there very much like Winifred, filled with
Wow.
such negative feelings about it, and ashamed, and it was horrible. But I mean, but it was I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did
But
it. It was the right
afterwards,
thing to
down the
do.
road, did you feel like, I know you did at that moment, but months later, did you feel some
Oh, I felt
peace
much
with
better.
that?
I
Yeah.
felt it right. I felt like the right thing
Yeah.
to do, without any
Yeah.
doubt at all.
There's
Yeah. I
what more
mean,
can I, yeah. I,
yeah.
and hopefully she did too. Hopefully down the road, hopefully that
Yeah,
helped her.
maybe. Well, I hope she
Yeah.
got an opportunity which she would never have had, to say, "No, you treated me really badly." So yeah, I hope so. Um,
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. But down the road, it helped you make peace with it. That's important.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
this is a good question from Fran, and I know that you're going to have a lot to say about this. So Fran's saying generational or cultural trauma would be an interesting topic for me. I would love to hear Chip and Veronica's thoughts on them and boarding schools. I watched Bear Grylls' interview with Louis Theroux and his experience at school. Some people in AA who speak of boarding school and the impact on them. I can't. I don't. I have to
Yeah,
prepare
I've got
myself
the
because when
well,
you tell your story, I think of my son, and I just about want to die.
yeah. I mean, I also think that it's important to place this historically. When I went to boarding school, I was 6.5. In those days, you went to boarding school, you were away for 3 months, 3 and a bit months. You had zero contact with your parents. You came home for 3.5 weeks, then you went back for another 3.5 months. Then you came back. And so you saw your parents probably 3, 4 months out of the year. The rest of the time you were out of contact. There was no mobile phones. There was maybe a letter every fortnight. And yes, I think people who went through boarding school now is a very, very different experience. And I do tend to be I don't think, I mean, I certainly would never have sent my son to boarding school. Um, but I mean, people do have regular contact with their parents now. But when I was at boarding school, and I think probably people Louis Theroux's age probably also got it, it was a complete and utter abandonment. And the children had no say in the matter. In my case, I wasn't even told where I was going. Um, and it was absolutely at the root of so many of my problems. The feeling of complete abandonment, the feeling of not being heard, of not being
Mm,
explained, of not being loved. you know, um, nothing, nothing, and just, you just were told to get, and they were they were bad places. They were brutal places. They were beating young boys. I
Mm,
got
mm,
beaten every term. There was lots of sexual abuse going on from teachers and things. I dare say many of the teachers were traumatized war veterans when I was at school, but nevertheless, they were not good places, and yeah, at one level it was a very privileged place. It was, I mean, my prep school, which was like aged, what is it, 6 to 11, we had our own golf course. We had tennis courts and
mm,
swimming pools and things. It was very privileged, but that, I'm sorry, that didn't make up for the fact that at 6.5, I'm put in a car, taken to this big building, and then suddenly my parents aren't there. Where the hell did they go? And you were, if you cried, you were teased. If you showed distress, you were told, there was nobody there to kind of comfort you. You were just told to get on with it, pull yourself together, man up. 6.5, 7 years old, man up, stop being such a baby. A wet, you used to be called a wet. If you cried, you were called a wet. And
mm,
yeah, no, they were bad places, and I think it would be incredibly difficult. People who say, "Oh, I boarding school and prep school, best years of my life," really, I maybe in comparison to your home life, it might have been, but I really wonder about that. I mean, obviously, you get used to it, you make friends, and a lot of people have remained friends with their boarding school companions for the rest of their lives. But I found it deeply traumatic. I think I've said on one of these podcasts before. Um, I was watching a documentary about abuse, and my school was notorious for abuse. Um, and the name of my school came up on the television screen, and I burst into tears. And that was like 10 years ago. I was 65 years old, and I just cried at the sight of that name of that school, because it just, all those memories came back. And this thing is about accepting your past and dealing with your past. And yes, I can talk about that stuff, but I've also got to learn from it. What was it about that experience that impacts me today? So there was obviously abandonment. There was obviously, not, I don't like being not being in control of a situation, because when I let other people control the situation, like my parents, they just did things without me having any input into the process at all. But I think it's definitely left me with a terrible fear of abandonment,
mm.
because I think it's very difficult to have gone through that old boarding school system without feeling, you're quite right. When I look at little 6.5-year-olds in the street, I think, oh my God, you're just tiny. You don't
Mm,
even, you just want
mm.
somebody to go for a walk with you, and it's, I know a lot of people will go, yes, but you've got a bloody good education, and you've got jolly good facilities. Yeah, I did. But the emotional damage,
That
in
didn't
my
work, did it?
that didn't work at all. No, that didn't work at all. And I have, there's this. I think anybody who honestly looks at their schooling will you can't come away with it without feeling really abandoned by it, because I mean that's what your
Yeah.
parents are doing. They're packing you off.
I
Yeah,
I mean, there's research into this. I think the research, there's a book about it as well.
there is. Yeah,
And I think it shows that
Renshaw,
boarding,
Renshaw, Andrew
is
Renshaw.
it? Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think the research shows that the boarding school is not a benefit for children. It's a benefit for parents,
no,
but I don't.
yeah,
It's not. I think it's child abuse, and from the context of this podcast, which is how to accept your past. I mean, trauma, that's a whole different topic, and that's something we need
yep,
professional help with. And
yes,
accepting, being able to I mean, we were just talking about this before we started recording. There's people in the world that have experienced mind-blowing trauma. And
Yeah.
I've seen lots of people, and you're one of them, who've been able to create a life and have a meaningful life
Hmm.
and have love and attachments. And I
Yep.
absolutely believe that's possible for everybody. But depending on
Yep.
what you've been through in the past is how much help you need. And trauma is really, that requires time, and it requires real expert professional input.
It
And it is
does.
possible,
Yeah.
but I don't. Yeah, I think boarding school is child abuse.
Yeah, I do as well. I mean, I think there are some things that you can learn just by talking to other people about, well, obviously because I was abandoned by my parents at 6.5, I feel abandoned and I have a trouble with abandonment. That kind of stuff you can talk about and learn from, and it's very useful to have that kind of information. But I also think the one thing that I was absolutely determined to do once I'd and I was about 4 or 5 years into recovery before I really did the work on this.
Yeah,
Um, uh, because I wasn't. I mean, I talked about it in rehab, but I talked about it in a way that was almost tried to make it funny, which was really an inappropriate way of me dealing with it. But
yeah.
later on, when I started to deal with it, I was absolutely determined that I was not going to empower those abusers for the
Mm.
rest of my life. I was not
Yes.
going to give them power over me.
Yeah,
And that's what I had done up
yeah,
until
yeah,
that point. I had
yeah,
continued to let those people have power over me, and I was
yeah,
not going to let that happen. And
yeah,
that's where getting that good professional help
yeah.
really helped me.
So
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. I think this is quite a good one, Christine. I think our generation of text, email, Facebook, social media, etc., creates opportunities for even more regrets due to instant access to say things when we have had too much to drink. I have so many regrets about things I say over text I would never say when sober. And I don't even think the person on the other end realizes alcohol is involved, which makes the guilt so much worse the next day. I'm really such a sensitive person, and alcohol numbs the sweet side of me at times. It's hard to forgive myself even when others do. Can I just say, I am so grateful I got sober before even smartphones, before
Yep.
texting,
Yep.
before social media.
Yep.
I would have been the idiot posting all kinds of ridiculous pictures of myself drunk and ugh. So I think felt that many times actually. I felt quite grateful, like, oh man, because I've got like a few pictures that I've scanned in just to use for
Yep.
and then
Yep.
I've got a handful of pictures of me drinking, like a handful that I control, and a handful of pictures through the entire era. Oh my god, I think yes, I think text, email, I think it does put a whole new twist on this because there's a record,
Yep.
right?
No hiding place. I mean,
Yeah,
I know all the things I did when I was drinking and using. I know all the terrible things I did, but there's not a visual record of it. There's not me, as you say, texting it or it being photographed or, so many times now people get
video.
outed sometimes, videos. Yeah. I mean,
Can you
everything
imagine
is out there for you
videos
to see.
being all over
Yeah. I
TikTok?
mean, awful, awful. Yeah, I mean, I have got, funnily enough, for some bizarre reason, about 8 or 9 photographs of me using, um, which it's too long a story, but I do have them, and I'm kind of glad I do have them, because if it doesn't ever happen, but if there was ever a time I thought, well, did you have a problem? Here are the photographs. But I think it must be so difficult when your shame is so publicly recorded. Um, I can present myself as a new person, and nobody has got any kind of record of me beforehand.
Mm,
They don't know what I was like. I can tell them what I was like, but they've got no picture of it. They haven't got records of it. They haven't got, uh, film of me in a TV studio making a fool, whatever. They
yeah,
haven't got anything, or at home. And sometimes you see, that when David Hasselhoff's children filmed him drunk,
Yeah.
that was. I think it was a wake up call for him, but that sort of stuff is happening a lot now. I think it's made, and that's there forever. That's never
Mm,
going away. Whereas
mm,
my memories will, you know, they'll die with me, really. I mean, my family know quite a lot of the stories and things that happened, but there'll be no visual record of me having a murky past. And so I think it is very difficult nowadays. And I think it can really make overcoming that guilt and overcoming your past that
mm,
little bit more difficult. Because I
mm,
could just, I rocked up to rehab. I was an idiot before I rocked up to rehab, and then I was okay. And there was a kind of clear defining moment. There was no lingering thing of somebody saying, well, what about this chip? And it wasn't
mm.
there. But nowadays, people have to be confronted with, oh, yeah, yeah, well, I've got a text here you sent me 5 years ago, and it's not, whatever. It must be horrible. It must be horrible. Although, having said that, I know that there are some members on Soberful who have got photographs of themselves drinking, and they are able to use that photograph as a really clear visual trigger for how much progress they've made,
Mm.
because they can see what they were like and they can see what they are like now, and they can see how fantastic the change is. So it can be used, looking at your past can be used positively. And I know that there's certainly a lot of members of Soberful who have, posted pictures of themselves in the past and posted pictures of them now, and they get real pride from showing the world how different they are, and quite rightly too. But I think at the beginning it must be really hard to have this kind of backpack of evidence of what a difficult person you were when you were drinking. It must be very difficult to come into sobriety like that.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that people can do, like, it's the same. That behavior, that stuff, it's not who we are. It's just it's
No.
a it's not who we are. So I think that you have to separate your behavior from who you are.
Yeah,
You know,
completely.
and I think that there's things you can do. I think you can close your account and open a new one, so all of that kind of is scrubbed.
Yeah.
And there's a whole law passed, actually, I think, in Europe about the that you're allowed to be forgotten on the internet. That is,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a whole thing
And
about I don't know if you remember this. This was in England about it was a few years ago, and it was a picture of a young guy who's maybe 20 urinating on a war memorial. And it was huge, like,
oh
oh
yeah, yeah,
my
yeah,
God, the
yeah, yeah,
disrespect, the this, the that, da, 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 da.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. And he was drunk, obviously. He looked like completely wasted. And there was a whole debate about, like, you know what? Did you not do something like incredibly foolish and stupid when you were young? You were really
Yeah.
lucky that that didn't happen in the digital age and it wasn't recorded, because those kind of things were not
Yeah,
making
exactly.
headline news in 1982 on from the front of the Times. So there's a whole thing about there
Yeah,
is a different,
he had the misfortune of being yeah, there is a difference. Had the misfortune
right?
of being a famous person's son. Yeah,
That's right.
which
That's
made it
right.
even, and the press
That's
got
right.
hold of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, rich
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
uh, yeah, yeah, exactly.
And anyway, so I think that we are dealing with a different this it is that we're
Oh,
still
that's what I was going to
navigating.
say. When I talk about myself and think about myself now as a using drug addict and alcoholic, I
Yeah.
find it incredible that we are the same person.
So, oh.
I
Mhm.
see
Mhm.
people sitting on benches, surrounded by shit. And I think that was me. And I find I am such a different person.
Mhm.
And it is so difficult sometimes to think, really, was that me? But it was. And yeah, there's something about being a completely different person that I think hopefully allows you to let go of the past a bit, to recognize that
Mhm.
everybody comes in with, nobody comes into this game, whatever you are, without any kind of wreckage and consequences. And I think that's the beauty, I think, of not doing this stuff on your own. So whether it's Soberful or support groups or smart groups or whatever it is, and there are lots and lots of things that are available to people now, hearing other people talk about the things that you've done really helps to get you to limit the guilt you feel to an appropriate level, to recognize that you're not the only person who's done these things and that other people are struggling with that. And that kind of sense of identification that you get with people is so important. And I think if you're just trying to get sober on your own, you're not getting that, you're not hearing that. And I think that obviously prolongs that process of healing much longer. And that's the beauty to me of working with other people who are and getting well with other people who are in the same boat, because it just makes everything feel a bit more. It's not just me. It's not just me who's been a terrible, terrible person.
Yeah.
There are a few other people out there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same. I remember going out with my husband in Cambridge and on a Saturday night, maybe go to a movie or something and see like young girls like literally lying in the
Yeah.
gut and throwing up. And I would say that is exactly what and my husband just being like, I can't even, like, there's just no way.
Yeah.
I can't. And I said, I feel the same. Like, I can't even
Yeah.
imagine that was me. I've changed, like, it's just. So I do think it's harder. I do think that's a whole other conundrum that people have to deal with, is that this digital footprint. And I think there's different ways that
Yeah.
we can, again, it is about kind of owning our past and cleaning up our side of the street. And like, if you have to close accounts and do stuff like that. And I think once you're also established, and, the other thing is, I will tell you, people, I mean, I know you told that story of your ex-wife, and that's different because, there's going to be
Yeah.
the odd person who's going to probably remember something until the day they die. But honestly, most people are not thinking about it. Most people are not
Mm.
kind of thinking about a text you sent last year, which didn't make a bit sense and was a bit rude. Mostly people have moved on. So
Mm.
I think that we have to kind of be aware of that, this feels really big in our minds, but for most other people, they're just like, and the other thing is, you know what, I want to end here. This is the biggest thing. Once you become who you're really meant to be, because sobriety is a journey back to yourself and you
Mm-hmm.
present in the world, that's who people remember and that's how people respond to you, right?
Yeah.
People,
Yeah.
even people from my past, they don't go, oh, I don't know. We don't know if we can trust Veronica because nobody
Yeah.
treats me like that. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
once you
Yeah.
become who you're really meant to be and people see that you are a decent person with integrity, doing your best, that's how people think of you and treat you. So really, all of this is about working on your sobriety, having a program, and just trying to be your best self. That is what clears it all up, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. No question about it at all. I agree completely. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. We will have we answer your questions next month, and we'll put it on social media so you can submit your questions. And we love trying to answer as many as we can. Let us know what you think of the
Yep.
episode, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much, everybody.
Okay.